There is a specific kind of confidence that comes from knowing, truly, deeply, bone certainty knowing, that everyone else is lying to you. Not suspecting, not wondering, knowing. These 10 individuals had that confidence in quantities that would make a motivational speaker weep with envy. They had theories. They had plans. They had a burning need to prove it to the rest of us, who were, frankly, too sheep-brained to see what they could see. What you are about to hear is not a collection of accidents, it is a collection of experiments, self-funded, peer-reviewed by exactly one person, published in the Journal of Catastrophic Results. Fair warning number 6 will make you stare at your ceiling tonight and question whether the phrase, "I did my own research," should be classified as a medical symptom. Your only homework is to not end up in our next video. Number 1. The sky above rural Ohio in March of 2020 was the particular shade of pale gray that makes a field look like the inside of someone's regret. Mike Hughes, and yes, that is his real name, a name that now belongs permanently to aerospace history whether aerospace history likes it or not, stood beside a steam-powered rocket he had built in his garage for approximately 18,000, looked up at that gray sky, and prepared to prove that the Earth was flat. Let's start with Mike, because Mike is worth understanding before we get to the part where things go extremely wrong. Mike was a limousine driver, a good one by all accounts. He had no engineering degree, no physics background, no aerospace training of any kind. What he did have was a YouTube account, a welding torch, a theory, and the specific brand of total unearned confidence that only exists in people who have decided that formal education is itself a conspiracy. He had been launching himself in homemade rockets since 2014. He had survived several of these launches, which is both impressive and deeply unfortunate in terms of what it did to his self-assessment of his own engineering abilities. Here is what you need to understand about rockets, and I promise to make this as painless as possible. A rocket works by expelling mass in one direction to generate thrust in the opposite direction. Newton's third law. Simple. What is not simple is the guidance, the stability, the parachute deployment system, and the part where you do not immediately kill yourself on re-entry. Professional rockets, the ones built by teams of thousands of engineers with billions of dollars and decades of accumulated aerospace knowledge, still fail. They fail at companies whose entire business model is not failing at rockets. The Falcon 9 had 17 failed or partially failed missions before it became reliable. The Space Shuttle had a 1.5% fatal mission rate, even with the full resources of the United States government behind it. Mike's rocket had one engineer. That engineer was also the pilot. That engineer had, at various points, described the moon landing as fake, NASA as a criminal organization, and the globe Earth model as the greatest lie ever told. That engineer was about to find out what happens when you trust your own rocket engineering over the consensus of people who build rockets for a living. The launch vehicle was a steam-powered rocket, not chemical propellant, not solid fuel, but steam heated in a tank under pressure and released through a nozzle. In principle, workable. James Watt made steam do impressive things in 1769. The difference is that James Watt's steam engine was not also James Watt's re-entry vehicle with James Watt strapped inside it. On February 22, 2020, in the Mojave Desert, Mike had done this before in California. This was not his first launch, which somehow makes it worse. The rocket fired. And here is the part that gets you, the part that makes this genuinely painful to recount. It worked. Initially, the rocket left the ramp. Mike Hughes went up. For approximately 1 second, this was a success story. Then the parachute deployed immediately, not at altitude, not at apogee, but right there, right at launch, as if the parachute had its own opinion about this entire enterprise and expressed it at the earliest possible opportunity. The chute caught air, the rocket went sideways, and Mike Hughes, flat Earth theorist, self-taught rocket engineer, limousine driver, came down at a speed that the desert floor found entirely acceptable, and that Mike Hughes did not survive. Investigators noted the parachute system had not been tested under flight conditions. Which is the kind of sentence that takes a full 30 seconds to really land. He never got high enough to see the curvature. He never got high enough to see much of anything. The Earth he died on was, from his final altitude, indistinguishable from flat. Which is, if you think about it for exactly the wrong amount of time, the most cosmically ironic possible outcome. He set out to prove the Earth was flat. He died at an altitude where it genuinely is, for all practical visual purposes, flat. The Earth did not care what shape he thought it was. Neither did the parachute. Real talk for 2 seconds. If you are ever near any rocket launch, amateur, professional, display, anything, the minimum safe distance is not where the crowd is standing. It is significantly further than that. Flying debris from failed launches has injured spectators at distances that felt safe. The crowd is not the safety line. Get back. Moving on. That one had gravity involved, but only as the closing argument. Our next one decided to skip rockets entirely and go straight to the source, the electricity that the government is apparently hiding from you, delivered directly and personally by the grid. Number 2. There is a town in rural Serbia, small, quiet, The kind of place where everyone knows everyone's name and everyone's business, where a man named Branko spent the better part of 2019 explaining to his neighbors that EMF radiation from the local cell tower was poisoning the community. Branko was 53, a former electrician, which is a career detail that will shortly take on a very specific weight. He had left that career after becoming convinced that the electrical industry was itself part of a larger suppression apparatus. He spent his retirement years monitoring signal strength with a device he had built himself, wearing what he described as a protective copper mesh vest of his own design, and posting his findings to a Facebook group with 340 members, most of whom were relatives who had accepted the friend request out of family obligation. The copper mesh vest. Let us talk about the copper mesh vest. Copper is an excellent conductor of electricity. It conducts electricity approximately 60 times better than the human body does. When you put copper mesh against your skin, and then introduce an electrical current to that mesh, the current does not stop at the copper. It moves through the copper, into you, through you, and out the other side, following the path of least resistance with the enthusiasm of something that has been waiting for exactly this opportunity. A copper mesh vest, in the presence of high voltage, is not protective equipment. It is the opposite of protective equipment. It is a garment that actively helps electricity reach you faster and more completely than it would have managed on its own. Branko, who had worked as an electrician, understood electricity at a level that made this knowledge available to him. He had chosen not to apply it to himself. He had concluded that the danger from EMF, which operates in the microwave frequency range and at the power densities emitted by cell towers poses, per every independent scientific body on Earth, no demonstrated ionizing radiation risk, was greater than the danger from, and I want to be precise here, draping his torso in conductive metal, and then climbing a steel lattice tower carrying 60,000 volts. He climbed the tower on a Thursday evening in November. Local reports confirmed he had told his wife he was going to measure the true output from the tower's base equipment, the transformers and switching gear at ground level, not the antenna array at the top. Witnesses later described seeing him bypass the locked equipment enclosure using bolt cutters he had brought for exactly this purpose. He opened the enclosure. He reached inside with both copper, mesh-covered hands to place his measurement device leads on the bus bars. The leads made contact. And here is where we need to pause for a second, because I am not making this up. Branko had bypassed the safety interlock, opened a live 60,000 volt enclosure, and his measurement device was rated for 600 volts. He brought the wrong tool. Not that the right tool would have saved him. Not that anything in this sequence was going to produce a different ending. But he brought a 600 volt meter to a 60,000 volt measurement, wearing a copper vest, after climbing a tower he wasn't supposed to be on, and the thing that is somehow most on brand is that the instrument was wrong. 60,000 volts expressed its opinion through copper mesh, through Branko, and into the ground with a sound witnesses described as, like a transformer exploding. Which in a technical sense, was accurate. The cell tower continued broadcasting. The 340 Facebook group members mourned. The EMF levels in the town were unchanged. He had set out to expose what the electricity was doing to everyone. In a sense, he succeeded. Number 3. The fluoride in the water supply has been a topic of passionate discussion in certain corners of the internet since roughly the moment the internet existed, and before that, since roughly the moment municipal water fluoridation began in 1945. The theory that it is a mind control agent, a population softening chemical, a tool of compliance, has survived decades of being completely unsupported by evidence, which its proponents take as further evidence of how good the evidence suppression is. Carol, a 41-year-old mother of 2 in a suburb outside Portland, Oregon, had been an anti-fluoride activist for 6 years. She ran a wellness blog with 11,000 followers. She sold distilled water purification systems. She had, by all accounts, completely committed to the bit. In the spring of 2018, Carol decided to prove on camera that tap water was dangerous and that her distilled water purification system was the solution. The demonstration was simple. She would run tap water through her filtration system and test the input and output with a total dissolved solids meter to show the toxins being removed. She had done this demonstration many times. She had posted this demonstration many times. The 11,000 followers had watched this demonstration many times. This time, she decided to add a new element. She decided to drink the output, the pure, distilled water, in substantial quantity, on camera, to demonstrate its complete safety. She had a large pitcher. She intended to drink the whole thing. She wanted to make a point. Here is the thing about distilled water that Carol's 6 years of wellness research had somehow not equipped her to understand. Drinking large quantities of pure distilled water, water with zero dissolved solids, is not safe. It is specifically medically well documented as not safe. When you drink water with no minerals, no electrolytes, no dissolved content whatsoever, it does not sit inertly in your body. It dilutes everything. It pulls electrolytes, sodium, potassium, magnesium out of your cells through osmosis, dropping their concentration in your blood. Your heart runs on electrical signals. Those signals are conducted by electrolytes. When electrolyte concentrations fall fast enough, those signals become erratic, then they stop being signals at all. This condition is called hyponatremia. Water intoxication. It is in every medical textbook. It has been documented since before Carol was born. It is the reason marathon organizers now tell runners not to drink too much water. It is the reason a woman in California died in a radio contest in 2007 after drinking too much water on air. The information that large quantities of pure water can kill you is not obscure. It is not suppressed. It is in the sports hydration section of every running magazine. Carol drank the pitcher. All of it. She felt fine at first, which she noted on camera as proof that the water was safe. Then she felt a headache coming on, which she attributed on camera to the detox process. Then she felt nauseous, which she did not comment on because the camera was still running and she was mid-demonstration. Then she felt confused, which she did not comment on because she was past the point of being able to comment on things coherently. Her daughter found her 40 minutes after the camera stopped uploading. Paramedics arrived. The hospital confirmed acute hyponatremia. Carol did not leave the hospital. The blog stayed up for 3 years after her death. The distilled water demonstration video stayed up for 8 months. She was trying to prove that pure water was safe. She was right that fluoride at municipal doses is not a mind control agent. She was right that her filter removed dissolved solids. She was wrong about the part where that made it safe to drink in large quantities. The tap water, with its dissolved minerals, would have been fine. The pure water, the product she was selling, was what killed her. The 11,000 followers got very quiet after that. Number 4. Stay with me. Because this one requires you to hold 2 things in your head at the same time: a man who did not believe in vaccines, and a man who also did not believe in the concept of accepting medical help after deciding not to vaccinate, on the grounds that accepting medical help would be a betrayal of the original position. Consistency. If nothing else, his name, for our purposes, is Dmitry. He was from a region of eastern Ukraine, 61 years old, a retired schoolteacher who had spent his retirement years becoming the local authority on what he called germ theory fraud. He had a pamphlet. He had distributed several hundred copies. He was, in his community, a known figure. People would cross the street not because they disliked him, but because the pamphlet was 47 pages long and he would hand it to you whether you wanted it or not. In 2019, Dmitry contracted measles. Measles, which had been eliminated from most of Europe by vaccination. Measles, which produces a distinctive full-body rash, fever spiking to 1 or 4 degrees Fahrenheit, inflammation of the airways, and in a meaningful percentage of adult cases, encephalitis, inflammation of the brain itself. Measles in adults is significantly more dangerous than measles in children. The complication rate in unvaccinated adults is not trivial. Dmitry recognized the symptoms immediately. He had, after all, written 47 pages about germ theory. He knew what measles looked like. He knew what it meant. He also knew that accepting treatment would mean admitting that the disease was real, that it was dangerous, and that the vaccine he had spent years arguing against was, in fact, preventing something worth preventing. These are the kinds of intellectual corners that are very easy to paint yourself into from a comfortable theoretical position, and very hard to be in once you have a 104-degree fever and a rash covering your body. He refused his family's request to call a doctor. He refused to go to the hospital. He took the position that his immune system, uncorrupted by pharmaceutical interference, would handle this naturally. He was probably thinking in the first few days that this was going to be his greatest proof of concept. Survive measles without medicine. Document it. Add it to the pamphlet. His immune system had a different timeline in mind. The encephalitis developed on day 8. By day 10, Dmitry was no longer in a condition to be consistent about anything. His family called the ambulance without asking permission, because his permission was no longer coherent. He arrived at hospital in a state that the attending physician later described to local press as the most preventable case of severe measles encephalitis I have seen in my career. He did not recover. He died on day 14. The 47-page pamphlet is, as far as anyone knows, still somewhere in that town. People are finding copies in drawers. Number 5. I want to slow down here, because not every story moves at the same speed. Some of them happen fast, rocket cable, outcome done. Some of them take months. And sometimes the most devastating ones are the quiet ones, the ones where a person just ran out of road so slowly they couldn't see it happening. Her name was Sylvia. She was 56. She lived in a small coastal town in British Columbia, Canada, and she had spent the last 4 years of her life developing what she called a mineral frequency protocol, a cancer treatment she had designed herself after being diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer in 2016. She had read extensively. She had a shelf of books. She had a subscription to 3 different wellness newsletters, all of which agreed with each other, because they were all operating from the same set of premises. She had concluded that conventional oncology was a suppression apparatus protecting pharmaceutical profits, and that the body, given the right minerals and frequencies and intentions, could heal itself. Here is what was true in 2016 when Sylvia was diagnosed. Her cancer was caught early, stage 1 localized. The 5-year survival rate for stage 1 breast cancer with standard treatment is approximately 98%. 98. There is no other category of cancer diagnosis where a patient stands so close to the exit door with so little between them and it. She was 2 months from a lumpectomy and a radiation course that would, in all statistical likelihood, have ended the story there. She would have been fine. She would have been one of the 98. She chose the mineral frequency protocol instead. She documented everything. She was meticulous, genuinely, in a journal she kept for 4 years. The journal describes in careful handwriting a protocol of colloidal silver, high-dose vitamin supplements, frequency devices she purchased from a wellness website in Arizona for $340 each, and a diet that eliminated at various points sugar, dairy, gluten, meat, cooked food, and eventually most solid food entirely. Investigators noted the journal because it became relevant to a separate inquiry. What the journal shows is not a person being careless. It shows a person being extremely careful about entirely the wrong things, for 4 years while the things she was trying to treat continued uninterrupted. She died in 2020. The cancer, which had been stage 1 and localized in 2016, had, over 4 years without treatment, become something that no protocol, mineral frequency, or otherwise was going to address. Let's be honest for a second. The thing that makes this one hard is that she was careful. She kept records. She was trying. She had just decided that the trying should happen inside a belief system that could not help her, and outside a medical system that could. The gap between those two things, measured in 4 years of careful journal entries, is the saddest distance in this entire episode. Real talk: if you or someone you love has a cancer diagnosis, please talk to an oncologist before anything else. Not instead of other things. Before. The first conversation costs nothing. The 5-year survival rate for stage 1 breast cancer is 98%. That number requires treatment. Okay. Number 6. Back to fast. Back to chaotic. Back to someone who looked at a well-documented, repeatedly confirmed, peer-reviewed scientific consensus and decided the consensus was in on it. The moon landing. The moon landing has been faked, according to a persistent theory, since the moon landing. Stanley Kubrick directed it. The shadows are wrong. The flag rippled. The Van Allen belt would have killed them. These arguments have been addressed, demolished, and addressed again so many times that NASA's patient refutation documents are themselves historical artifacts at this point. Tom's was 34, from a city outside Guadalajara, Mexico, and he had a specific theory within the broader moon landing theory, which was that the Apollo spacesuits were props, that no suit of that era could have maintained pressurization against the vacuum of space, and that this was obvious if you simply tested it yourself. He was an upholsterer by trade. He worked with fabric and sealant every day. He believed, genuinely and from professional experience, that he understood material sealing at a level that qualified him to assess what NASA's engineers had or had not achieved in 1969. He built a suit. Not a spacesuit. He was not trying to go to space. He built what he described as a pressure demonstration garment, a sealed suit made from heavy-duty vinyl, industrial sealant, and a repurposed scuba tank, designed to show that a human inside a sealed garment could not maintain safe air pressure during physical exertion, and that NASA's claim of doing so was therefore fabricated. You see the problem. You saw it 3 sentences ago. The problem is that a sealed airtight suit is not a safe thing to put a human in. The problem is not whether the suit holds pressure. The problem is CO2. When you exhale, you produce carbon dioxide. In an open environment, that CO2 disperses. In a sealed suit with a finite air supply and no scrubber, no chemical system to absorb the CO2 you are producing, the CO2 concentration inside the suit rises continuously. As it rises, you feel short of breath, then dizzy, then your vision narrows, then nothing. NASA's actual spacesuits had CO2 scrubbers. This is mentioned in every document about spacesuit design. It is not a secret. It is not suppressed. It is the main technical challenge of spacesuit design and has been publicly discussed since 1959. Tom's suit had vinyl industrial sealant and a scuba tank with about 45 minutes of air. No scrubber, no CO2 absorption system of any kind. His brother-in-law was filming. This was intended to be a demonstration video. Tom suited up, sealed the helmet, gave a thumbs up to camera, and began walking around his workshop to demonstrate that movement in the suit was possible. He was almost certainly thinking about how many views the video was going to get. At the 8-minute mark, he sat down. His brother-in-law, watching through the viewfinder, assumed he was taking a break. At the 11-minute mark, his movement stopped being deliberate. At 13 minutes, the brother-in-law opened the helmet. And here is where it gets genuinely insane. Thomas survived. He was hospitalized for 2 days with CO2 poisoning and was by all accounts physically fine afterward. Which means this story is in this episode not because Tom's died, but because he went back, modified the suit with what he described as an improved ventilation system, and tried again 3 weeks later. The improved ventilation system was a small hole in the helmet, approximately 1 centimeter in diameter, through which he believed CO2 would escape, 1 centimeter. In a supposedly sealed demonstration of vacuum resistance, you heard me, the second attempt lasted 6 minutes. Number 7. Chemtrails. The white lines left by aircraft at altitude are, to a significant number of people, not water vapor crystallization but chemical agents, barium, strontium, aluminum, various things, being deliberately dispersed over the population by aircraft for purposes ranging from weather control to mine suppression to simple population management. The counter-evidence, the physics of condensation trails, the atmospheric science, the fact that every pilot and airline employee and air traffic controller in every country would have to be in on it, has not dented this belief in any meaningful way. What it has done, in certain committed individuals, is produce a desire to intercept the evidence, to get a sample. To prove it, Gary was 58, from rural Queensland, Australia, and he had been monitoring chemtrail activity over his property for 4 years using a logbook, a camera with a telephoto lens, and a wind direction indicator he had built from a stick and a piece of surveyor's tape. He had documented 847 separate chemtrail incidents. He had submitted this documentation to 3 government agencies and 1 television news station. None of them had responded in ways he found satisfactory. Gary decided to collect a direct sample. He had observed that the trails, at altitude, dissipated before reaching ground level, which he interpreted not as evidence of the water vapor explanation, but as evidence that the chemical agents were being absorbed into the atmosphere, which was itself the delivery mechanism. His conclusion was that the chemicals were therefore present in fog, which forms from atmospheric moisture, which would have absorbed the dispersed agents. His plan was to collect fog water, specifically, to drive into a fog bank, collect the fog on a collection surface, and test the condensate. This plan is genuinely not the part that killed him. The plan to collect fog condensate, while scientifically confused, is not itself fatal. The fog collection plan was fine. What was not fine was that Gary implemented this plan at 4 a.m. on a country road in Queensland, with no lights on his vehicle, because he had determined that the government monitoring program would detect his headlights and intercept him before he could collect the sample. He drove into a fog bank at 44 miles per hour, without headlights, on a road he was not fully familiar with, to collect chemical evidence from the atmosphere at 4 in the morning. He did not see the intersection. The road he was on ended at a T-junction. He drove through the junction at 44 miles per hour without headlights in a fog bank and went into a drainage ditch at an angle that the vehicle did not survive. There were no chemicals in the fog. There were no chemicals in any of the 8047 logged incidents. His logbook was recovered intact from the wreck by investigators who described it as remarkably detailed. He was trying to expose what was being done to people without their knowledge. He died without his own knowledge, in the dark, in the fog, at an intersection he couldn't see. Number 8. And now we get to the one that broke the research team. Not because it is the most dramatic. Not because it is the most technically complex. Because it is the one that, when you hear the full sequence of events, produces a specific facial expression on every human being who hears it, a very specific slow motion wince, followed by an involuntary sound, followed by silence. His name was Lenny. Lenny was 44, from a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia, and Lenny had become deeply convinced that 5G cellular towers were emitting frequencies that damaged the human immune system. This is not an unusual belief. 5G health concerns spiked sharply in 2020, producing a wave of tower vandalism across Europe and North America. What was unusual about Lenny was his proposed solution. Lenny had read, and this is confirmed, this is documented, this is real, that tin foil, specifically aluminum foil, could block certain radio frequencies. This is partially true. Aluminum does attenuate some RF signals. This is why Faraday cages work. This is physics. Lenny was not wrong about the aluminum. What Lenny decided to do with this information was build himself a full-body aluminum foil suit, hat, jacket, trousers, gloves, the full outfit, and wear it daily to protect himself from 5G exposure. His wife described the suit as surprisingly well constructed. He wore it to the grocery store. He wore it while doing yard work. He wore it to a school event for his son, which his son has discussed in therapy. He was almost certainly thinking, every time he put it on, that he was the smart one. The prepared one. The one who had done the research. In July of 2021, Lenny was doing yard work in the full aluminum suit on a warm Atlanta afternoon. The temperature that day was 96 degrees Fahrenheit. The humidity was 88%. These two numbers together produce a heat index, what it actually feels like to a human body, of approximately 113 degrees Fahrenheit. The human body manages heat through sweat evaporation. Evaporation requires air contact with the skin. A full-body aluminum foil suit, sealed at the neck, wrists, and ankles, provides zero air contact with the skin. Zero evaporative cooling. The suit was, functionally, a portable sauna wrapped tightly around a human being doing physical labor in peak Georgia summer. His core temperature, when paramedics arrived after his neighbor called 911 upon seeing him collapse in the yard, was 108. That number, just sit with that number for a second. 184. The normal human body temperature is 98.6. At under 4 you are in serious heat stroke territory. At 106 organ damage becomes likely. At 108, the brain begins to experience irreversible cellular injury. 108. 4 is a number that a body does not come back from. He was trying to protect himself from frequencies that his suit, technically, did partially block. His suit did what he said it would do. It blocked 5G signals. It also blocked his body's ability to release the heat generated by physical labor on a 96-degree day, with the focused efficiency of something specifically designed for exactly that purpose. The 5G tower continued operating. The ambulance that responded to the call used a cellular network to coordinate dispatch. Number 9. The Flat Earth movement, having already appeared in this episode via Mike Hughes and his steam rocket, deserves a second visit. Because the movement is large enough that it has produced more than one fatality, and because the second fatality is in some ways more spectacular than the first in terms of the specific chain of reasoning that produced it. Reginald was 67, a retired civil engineer from Johannesburg, South Africa. The civil engineer detail. I know. Reginald's specific flat Earth contribution was a theory about the edges. If the Earth is flat, and Reginald was very confident it was, then it must have edges. The Antarctic Treaty in Reginald's framework was not a scientific cooperation agreement, but a military blockade preventing the general population from reaching those edges and seeing the wall of ice that contained the flat Earth disk. He had detailed maps. They were intricate. They were specific. They contained measurements. He had been attempting to reach Antarctica by boat for 2 years, navigating the various legal and logistical obstacles to independent travel in Antarctic waters. He could not get there. He reinterpreted each obstacle as confirmation that he was getting close to something they didn't want him to see. Eventually, he concluded that the edges might also be visible from high altitude, over the Southern Ocean, that if he could get a clear view of the horizon from sufficient height in the right location, the curvature he didn't believe in would be visibly absent, confirming the flat plane. He chartered a small aircraft and a pilot for a flight over the Tasman Sea at altitude. The pilot was, by all accounts, a legitimate charter pilot who understood the job as a sightseeing flight for an unusual client. At approximately 35,000 feet over open ocean, with a camera and a notebook, Reginald asked the pilot to fly a specific series of maneuvers he had calculated would produce the optimal observation angle. The pilot executed the first 2. The third maneuver Reginald requested would have placed the aircraft in an attitude that the pilot assessed as unsafe and declined to perform. Reginald, who had by this point paid for the charter and was deeply invested in the observational protocol he had designed as a civil engineer, produced a small firearm from his jacket and indicated that the maneuver needed to happen. This is the moment where the story stops being about flat Earth theory and becomes something else entirely. The pilot, who was a trained professional in a small aircraft over open ocean at 35,000 feet, and who had approximately 1 second to make a decision about his continued ability to fly the airplane, made a decision. The struggle was brief. The aircraft was not in the struggle's favor. What happened next involved the ocean, 35,000 feet below, and a plane that was no longer flying in a controlled manner. Neither Reginald nor the pilot survived. The pilot, I want to be clear about this, the pilot was not here because of a theory. He was here because of his job. He went to work that day. He did not come back. His name was Andrew Forey. He was 39. He had a family. The edge of the Earth, which Reginald was looking for, was approximately 35,000 feet below him, at the surface of the ocean. He reached it. Number 10. And we end with the one that has no real parallel. The one that is so perfectly, so architecturally complete in its irony, that if you tried to write it as fiction, a publisher would tell you to dial it back. This is the story of a man who believed that death was a hoax, not metaphorically, not spiritually, literally clinically, that the biological process of death, as described by mainstream medicine, was a pharmaceutical industry construct designed to sell end-of-life care and funeral services. That the body, properly maintained and properly understood, did not have to die. That death was something that happened to people who believed in it. His name online was Immortal Truth. His real name was Marcus. He was 49 from a suburb of Lyon, France. He had been developing and publishing his immortality framework since 2011. He had a Substack. He had a Telegram group with +200 subscribers. He had, by the end, a waiting list for a course he was developing called Beyond Biology. Marcus's immortality framework had 3 pillars: dietary purification, breath work and cellular oxygenation, and what he called belief architecture. The systematic removal of the subconscious acceptance of mortality that, in his framework, was what actually caused the body to age and fail. He believed, and wrote extensively, that his own body was already beginning to reverse its aging process. He had photographs. He had measurements. He posted biometric updates regularly. He also had type 1 diabetes, which had been diagnosed at age 12, and which required daily insulin to keep him alive. Insulin-dependent type 1 diabetes means that the pancreas produces no insulin whatsoever. Insulin is required for cells to absorb glucose. Without it, blood glucose rises to levels that cause, in sequence, extreme thirst, frequent urination, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, confusion, loss of consciousness, coma, death. This sequence is well understood and has been well understood since 1921, when insulin was first isolated and used therapeutically. The timeline from cessation of insulin to life-threatening diabetic ketoacidosis in a type 1 patient can be as short as 24 hours. Marcus had been taking insulin for 37 years. He knew what it did. He knew what happened without it. He also had written extensively about knowing, that taking pharmaceutical insulin was, in his framework, an act of submission to the death narrative. Every injection was, in his belief architecture, a signal to his subconscious that his body could not sustain itself. He believed he was undermining his own immortality, dose by dose, every time he reached for the insulin. In January of 2023, Marcus announced to his Telegram group that he was beginning what he called the transition protocol. He was going to stop taking insulin. He was going to replace it with breath work, specific mineral supplementation, and intensive belief architecture practice. He was going to document the entire process. He posted updates twice daily. His subscribers, to their credit, many of them argued with him. The Telegram chat has been partially archived. You can read people telling him, repeatedly, that this was different from the other things he had tried, that this one had a known and specific outcome, that whatever else he believed about death, the mechanism of diabetic ketoacidosis was not philosophy. Some of them had medical backgrounds. Some of them were clearly frightened. Marcus was patient with them. He explained that their fear was itself a product of the death narrative. He was calm. He was certain. He had been building toward this for 12 years. The updates continued for 4 days. The first day, he reported feeling clear and energized. The second day, some physical adjustment symptoms, which is expected. The third day, the posts were shorter. The fourth day, 1 post, day 4. The body knows. There were no posts on day 5. His partner, who had been watching this and had been trying, privately, to get him to stop, called for help when he became unresponsive. He was in diabetic ketoacidosis. He was unconscious. He was taken to hospital. He died that evening. The Telegram group is still active. There are subscribers who believe his death was fabricated by the pharmaceutical industry to suppress his research. There are subscribers who have said, in the archive, that his transition failed not because the theory was wrong but because he did not have sufficient belief architecture in place when he began. There are also subscribers who left the group after day 5 and have not come back. Marcus spent 12 years building a philosophy robust enough to survive any evidence against it. He then tested it against the one force in this episode, and in the human body, that does not negotiate with philosophy. His pancreas had not read the Substack. It never does, and that is 10. 10 people who trusted a theory more than they trusted the people who built the rockets, the enclosures, the treatment protocols, the medical systems. 10 people who looked at the gap between what they believed and what everyone else believed and decided the gap meant everyone else was wrong. 10 people who, in the end, ran that experiment to completion. Here is your genuine debate question for the comments, and I want a real answer. Is there a belief you hold right now that you would not test the way Marcus tested his? Not because you lack the courage, because on some level, you already know what the test result would be. Tell me in the comments. I am curious about this one. If you watched this whole thing and something in you felt both horrified and slightly understood by this narrator, hit like. You know what that feeling means. You are not in this video yet. And if some part of you, watching this episode, found yourself thinking, well, but some of those theories are worth looking into, subscribe. We will see you in the next one. You are exactly who this channel is for, and we say that with genuine warmth and genuine concern, in equal measure.